Yeah, to my relatives. Hello, this is Mark Charles. Today is Thursday, February 13th. I'm here with my second cup of coffee. And I want to talk about, once again, the chaos that I'm attributing to what I am calling the cult of Trump and our need to protest strategically. If you follow me on social media, you'll remember this post I gave just a few days ago. I said, sorry, wrong post. Uh, Once you start believing that you need to comment, protest, scream about every crazy thing Trump does, he wins. Put down your phone, go for a walk, talk to a friend, choose your comments, protests, and screams carefully and strategically. Do not let Trump win. Walk in beauty. I shared this on my social media, my Facebook, my Blue Sky, my LinkedIn, my Patreon, and one of the most frequent comments and responses I got from that were people saying, "Thank you for reminding me about that. Thank you for reiterating those words. I need to remember these things." And it struck me how right when we look at what's going on right now, social media is exhausting, public spaces are tense, global relationships are strained. From everything, it looks like government workplaces are becoming more and more toxic every day. It's barely 4 weeks into his second term, and Trump is wearing out his welcome, not only with people who would consider themselves his opponents, but even with his followers that are just like, what is going on? And so, one of the things I want to advocate for today is yes, we absolutely need to protest what's going on. There are some very dire injustices taking place, some very threats to some long held standards in our country that we need to address, but we cannot protest everything. We cannot scream about everything because that's the world Trump lives in. And once we enter into and live in his world, his chaos reigns there and we lose. So I want to remind ourselves today that yes, social media is exhausting. Yes, global relationships are strained. Take time, breathe, put down your phone, stop reading the news, talk to friends, go for a walk, eat healthy food, exercise, do something to bring yourself back to center. Something to remember to walk in beauty. My relatives, my name is Mark Charles. You're joining me for my second cup of coffee. It's a podcast I give usually about once a week, sometimes twice a week, talking about the social, political, religious, chaotic events of the day, trying to reframe them, make sense of them, and trying to teach a common history, a common memory, so that we as a nation can learn how to walk more in beauty with ourselves and with one another. I want to start like I always begin my podcast by acknowledging I'm speaking to you from what's now known as Washington, D.C., the traditional lands of the Piscataway. I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the land where I'm living. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state how humbled I am to be living, moving, breathing, working, existing on these lands today. So, ahiat, my Piscataway relatives. Thank you for your stewardship of these lands. For those of you who are new to my podcast, I want to invite you or encourage you to follow me on Patreon. Patreon is one of the best places to not only hear my voice clearly, but also it's a great place to support the work I'm doing. I work very hard to shift the paradigm, reframe the paradigm of our social, political, and religious environment. And I do that by critiquing both sides, both the left and the right, both conservatives and liberals. And I try to get down to the foundational level of what is really the problem, what is really going on here, not just scream about the normal debates that the two sides scream at each other with. And to do that, I need to keep my voice, I work fiercely to keep my voice independent. And so one of the reasons I don't monetize my YouTube channel or my other social media is because I don't want to give advertisers the slightest even hint of sway over what I do say and don't say, what I do talk about and don't talk about. You will see advertisements on my YouTube channel, but I don't benefit from those. I don't monetize those. But one of the ways you can support my work is if you subscribe to me on Patreon, subscribe to one of my tiers, and it's a great place to not only hear my voice more directly and some deeper content and some other conversations I'm having, but also it's a great way to just support my work and help me keep my voice independent. I'm going to put the link for my Patreon in my chat right now, and you're welcome to go there anytime and subscribe. You can even follow me for free there. I have public posts. I post there frequently. But if you subscribe to any of the tiers, you'll get more content. One of the best tiers is my Ask Questions tier, which is the tier. It's $10 a month, and it gets everything I post on my YouTube and on my public social media. But it also holds a Q&A I have once a month. And that Q&A is actually coming up this Sunday. So this Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be having my monthly Patreon Q&A. If you're subscribed to that tier or higher on my Patreon, you'll be able to join me for a Zoom call, and we'll have my monthly Q&A there. It's always a great discussion, a great conversation. I really look forward to those times. Anyway, I want to see who's on with me. Shantina Yate, thanks for joining me from Virginia this early and cold Saturday or Thursday afternoon. For those of you who are not aware, we actually got some snow here in DC a couple days ago. It started snowing on Tuesday night and yesterday, as the schools were closed yesterday, and things are slowly coming back. We're actually getting rain today. It hasn't been very cold, but it has been. We got about 6 to 8 inches of snow here in the DC area, and so yeah, it's definitely feels like winter. So Shantina Yate, thanks for joining. Jermaine Yate, thanks for joining. It's good to have you here. I appreciate everyone who joins. Jessica, Oscar, thank you all for being a part of and joining me for my second cup of coffee. So the first thing I want to address, and yes, you did read my title right, I did refer to it as the cult of Trump. I want you to know I don't choose those words lightly. I know saying that is going to turn off a certain demographic and segment of the public from even watching this YouTube video. But I don't use that term lightly. I actually have put some thought into it. I may end up doing a podcast in the future about why specifically I believe Trump and especially his most ardent followers are in what could very easily be described as a cult. But for now, I want to. The reason I chose to use that term today is because the world Trump lives in is a chaotic world, and he creates chaos around him, and it makes it very hard to even know what's important and what you're focusing on, and even what he's doing. And there was this article in the New York Times. This was early in his second term, which already seems like a long time ago. This was soon after his inauguration, after he pardoned almost all of the January 6th people who were arrested, and even those who were convicted and found guilty, or even those who pled guilty. And he pardoned or commuted almost all of their sentences. And there was this article in the New York Times. It was titled, "Trump Pardoned Her for Storming the Capitol." Absolutely not, she said. And it's about this 78-year-old woman who was arrested and actually pled guilty for her part in storming the Capitol on January 6th in 2021. And when she received Trump's commutation of her sentence, she didn't want it. She said, "No, I did something wrong, and I need to be held accountable for that." And the story actually says the 78-year-old woman's the 78-year-old will commence his second term as president. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong paragraph there. Miss Hemphill, she's not 78, she's 71. Miss Hemphill, 71, who was called MAGA Granny in some news headlines, has said that she no longer supports Mr. Trump or believes his lie that the 2020 election was stolen. She said that a therapist had helped her change her view of the attack by telling her that she is not a victim of January 6th. I was a volunteer. And she went on to describe, and I want to get this quote. She says, "I lost my critical thinking," she said on Wednesday, reflecting on her involvement in the riot and the Stop the Steal movement. "Now I know it was a cult, and I was in a cult." So now you have Trump's own followers who have had what you might want to call an intervention by the courts and made to confront what they believed, what they were following, what they did. And at least one of them is explicitly referring to what she was involved in as a cult. And so, yeah, I don't use that term lightly the in the title of my podcast, this episode of my podcast. But there is a lot of evidence, I believe, that points to what Trump is doing is creating a cult-like environment. He is, and those who follow him are in a cult, and many of them are in denial and in need of what I would call an intervention, which is one reason why screaming at them and just protesting them and just doing your normal, right, the normal back and forth is not going to work, because I truly believe, and I see strong evidence that they are in a cult. And they are believing things that they don't actually believe and that don't actually make sense, but they're caught up in this system and they're not able to see clearly. And so I think there's other ways we need to address them. And that is a topic for another episode of My Second Cup of Coffee. I don't want to go all the way into that today, but I do want you to know, yes, I am intentionally using it and using the word cult and calling it the cult of Trump, because for this reason, for now, even his own followers and people who have been through an intervention, who have seen the consequences and have even felt the consequences of their actions and reflect on what they've done, are saying, yes, I was in a cult. That was a cult that I was a part of. And I think we have to take that seriously, and we have to really understand what is going on there and what's happening. But that's not everything I want to talk about. If you get on your social media in the evenings or during the day, right? It's so easy now to get sucked into the news, because every other headline is about something Trump did, something Trump said, some executive order that he gave, something that Musk is actively being a part of and helping propagate, right? And it's this chaotic world. Even if you tune into Fox, it's much of the same stuff, where people are bewildered at what's going on and how much he's wildly pursuing his own agenda. And it feels very, very, very chaotic. And one of the things I want to caution people about is not to get sucked into all of these headlines, right? As I said in my social media post, if you feel like you have to scream, protest, counter everything Trump does, he wins, because that's the world he lives in. And so we have to learn how to filter through the chaos and through the nonsense that's out there. And I want to start by talking about a few topics that, yes, they grab headlines and they make people start screaming, but we have to think about them. One of the headlines, and this is one that's come up frequently, not only since his inauguration, but even before then, is his talk about teasing out the idea of running for a third term. He's mentioned it in several interviews. He's talked about going into his third term. There's even been a proposal to revoke the 22nd Amendment and to allow him to run for a third term. And Democrats, especially those who are running for office or those who are trying to fundraise, are going to highlight these statements and scream about them and put them on the front lines, and newspapers and news organizations are going to highlight these things, because this is what makes people click on them, and this is what is going to just drive clicks and produce more money and give more fundraising. But it adds to the chaos. And we have to remember a few things about the possibility of Trump running for a third term. First of all, there was a very clear amendment, the 22nd Amendment, that prohibits running for a third term. So to even make it possible to happen, this amendment would have to be overturned. Second, this has been a long-standing debate in our nation since its foundings. Some of the people who wrote the Constitution were on both sides of the issue about whether or not a president could run for multiple terms or whether they should just be one or two terms. George Washington set the precedent by stepping down after his second term. But the debate by no means ended. Yes, there became a standard and a precedent. And believe it or not, it was a Democrat who broke the precedent. It was Theodore Roosevelt who actually broke the precedent and served 4 terms. And it was after him that we got this 22nd Amendment. And not all the Democrats supported the amendment. And since then, senators and representatives on both the left and the right have advocated for revoking the 22nd Amendment and allowing presidents to serve more than 2 terms. And so we have to remember that this debate about presidents serving more than 2 terms is a pretty common debate throughout the history of our nation. And it's the Democrats who have broken precedent and been the most egregious against this the precedent of serving only 2 terms when Theodore Roosevelt served 4. And Democrats were not unanimous in supporting a 22nd Amendment that limited it to 2 terms. This has been a partisan issue for most of our nation's history, often depending on who's in office, but not always. There's been one Democratic Republican, or one Democratic representative who has actually been from like 1996 to 2013. He introduced a bill in the House pretty much every session of the House through both Democratic and Republican presidents to revoke the 22nd Amendment and allow presidents to serve more than 2 terms. Harry Reid proposed amending the Constitution. Mitch McConnell did, and many others. And so we have to remember this has been a fairly large debate throughout our nation's history. And people from both sides have argued for and against it. And it's the Democrats who have most overstepped the bounds and been the most egregious regarding it. And so as Democrats and left-leaning media are gaslighting people regarding this issue, let's just remember this is a fairly common and normal debate that our country has been having for a very long time. Second, and I'm going to post another article about this, and this isn't necessarily from these articles, but I'm just giving you some more resources regarding this debate. This one is from the AP. It says Trump's third-term musings seem to be a tease more than a pledge, right? And Trump he's mused about running for a third term, but he's also said, I'm tired of being the target of so many things, and I want to just go off and live my life, and I don't want to keep serving. And right, so he said both things. And there was one article I read, I don't remember exactly which article it was, where one of his aides in the White House said, yeah, he likes to say that, especially publicly, because it gaslights Democrats and gets them screaming about things while he's trying to draw attention away from something else he's doing, right? I mean, this is what Trump does. This is the chaos that he rules in and he lives in. And so we have to be very careful. Now, I know there's one side of the debate that people say, well, look at what happened on January 6th, where he actually tried to keep himself in office and he's willing to go. And yes, I will agree that's a concern. But again, we have to remember there are some issues Trump does and he talks about and says, which are just pure gaslighting and pure to cause chaos and to detract or distract from something else he's trying to do. And I really think this whole screaming back and forth about the third term is one of those. I'm also going to just give you one other resource here. This is from a government track website. And in this, they just give some of the history of all the proposals that have gone forward to revoke the 22nd Amendment. And it just, it's Serrano, Representative Serrano, who's a Democrat, who did it from 1997 to 2013. Two Republicans, Vanderjet and Mitch McConnell, did it most recently in 1995, I think. And Senator Harry Reid proposed that idea in 1989. This is from this website I was just pointing out. And then there's just the practical side of all this. I'm going to share this article from Al Jazeera. And this article is about how at his inauguration, President Trump is older than Joe Biden was when he was inaugurated in 2021. And so Trump is literally the oldest serving president we've ever had as a nation. He is 78 years old. He is older than Joe Biden was when he was inaugurated in 2021. And Trump does not take good care of himself. He doesn't eat well. He does not take good care of himself. And I don't think physically he's just going to be able to run for a third term, right? He is an old man. And right, the Republicans have to be getting to the point where most middle-aged adults get with their parents, right? At what point do you have the conversation of you have to take the car keys away from them because it's just not safe to let them drive anymore? And there has to be conversation, just like the Democrats had those conversations for 4 years. Now the Republicans need to be having those conversations. Trump is an old man. He does not take care of himself. He is not healthy. And so even just his physical ability to run for a third term is going to be seriously questionable. Just like we saw how much Joe Biden went downhill age-wise during his time in office. Right? Trump's musing was about going for a third term. We have to remember, right? There's this something about that generation of these white landowning men and women, actually, who just refuse to leave power, just refuse to leave office. It's like they don't trust anybody but themselves in their generation to take care of things. And this is, that's again a topic for a whole nother second cup of coffee. But we have to remember Trump is 78 years old. Physically, I don't think he has a third term left in him. So anyway, so the point of all this is don't be dragged into the chaotic debate and distracting conversations that the Trump White House is trying to use to get Democrats in the media screaming about something that has very little chance of actually happening. Now, are there things we need to be protesting? Are there things we need to be confronting? Absolutely. A third term right now is pretty low on what I would call the priority list of things we need to be talking about. So what is it we need to be discussing? I made this post the other day. I'm going to share this. I put this up on my Facebook as well as a few other places, where I said I will not be calling it the Gulf of America. Right, and I've said a few things about this in the past as well. Technically, the Gulf of America is more accurate than the Gulf of Mexico because America is not a country, believe it or not. America is a continent. We have North and South America, the United States of America. We are not America. The 50 states and territories that make up the USA are not America. We are the United States of America. America is a continent, it's a landmass. So technically, first of all, calling it the Gulf of America is probably more accurate. Now, in the failings of our education system and the white supremacy and self-centeredness of this nation's history, we all know what Trump is trying to do by calling it the Gulf of America. And I just posted the other day, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to be calling it that. Now, on one hand, I don't really care what they call it. Even the Gulf of Mexico is a colonial term, right? So we could even go there. But it's the thinking that's behind that. And it's actually there's this article, it was in Politico the other day. I read this, and I've read it in several other articles, where the AP, Associated Press, has refused to call it, at least as of yesterday, the Gulf of America. And they said, we will continue to refer to it as the Gulf of Mexico. That is, it's how people know it globally, and they're going to continue to call it the Gulf of Mexico. And the White House barred the AP reporter from coming into a meeting, a briefing, and held them out of the briefing because they refused to acknowledge what the Trump administration had put out into an executive order. Now, that's problematic. That is something we need to pay close attention to. The idiotic debate over calling it the Gulf of Mexico versus the Gulf of America, that's beside the point. The fact that the White House is barring reporters from their briefing rooms because they don't like the way they're reporting, that's something we need to pay very close attention to. There's another issue that I think we need to pay very close attention to. And this happened the other day when Trump signed an executive order pausing the enforcement of international bribery laws of the U.S. companies from bribing foreign governments and other entities. This is really problematic. And they're saying they're pausing the enforcement of this. Trump has directed the Justice Department to not enforce and to not bring charges against companies that engage in bribery because it puts our companies at a competitive disadvantage on a global scale. And this is a very problematic something we need to watch. Now, they're saying it's a pause, and they're going to come back with a better proposal and a better law that will not hurt our companies as much as this one does. But again, we have to remember Trump is first and foremost a businessman. He's not a politician. He's a real estate agent. And actually, he's rarely even that. He's a self-promotion guy, right? And he's been promoting his brand and his name and his company all around the globe. And I would not doubt for a moment if he has been investigated for bribing, or if he has, and his organization has bribed foreign officials. I wouldn't doubt that. I have no evidence about it, but I wouldn't doubt if he's engaged in that, because that seems to fit in directly in line with Trump's character and the ways that he misrepresents and even lies and does so many other things. And I know maybe he's held back a few times because he knew about these laws, and right, so he's like, yeah, it puts our companies at a competitive disadvantage. Well, this is what it means to live in a nation of laws, Mr. Trump. Right? This is what it means. Yes, just because everybody's doing something doesn't mean that's the right thing to do. And we need to pay very close attention, right? And the fact that Trump has broken many precedents, right? He's a convicted felon who ran for president again and is serving as our president as a convicted felon. So I have no trust, no confidence whatsoever in Trump's moral judgments and decisions. I have no confidence whatsoever. The man is a convicted felon, unrepentant. Even said that he doesn't ask God for forgiveness because he doesn't think he does anything wrong. If he does something wrong, he tries to do better. He doesn't. Anyway. So this is something we need to pay attention to, because just because other nations are doing it does not make that the right thing for us to do as a nation. And it is not going to help the global environment, and it's not going to help our global community. So anyway, I think that is something we need to pay a lot of attention to. I'm not going to talk about DEI right now. Now, the reason I'm not going to talk about DEI is because there are a lot of things going on with DEI, and I will probably do an episode specifically on DEI coming up. But I want to talk for a few minutes about Gaza. And I commented on this a few weeks ago when Trump made his proposal to create a luxury resort out of Gaza, the Riviera of the Middle East, I think is what he called it. And he talked about removing the Palestinian people from Gaza, and the U.S. taking control of it and owning it and turning it into the Riviera of the Middle East. And when you put this in line, and much of the globe, right, rejected it. Countries in the Middle East, our allies, right, they're like, that's crazy talk. Israel wasn't quite so sure, at least the right-leaning side of Israel. But it's been pointed out, to make that happen would literally involve ethnically cleansing the land. And he's like, oh, well, we're going to give them better homes and better houses somewhere else, and they'll be happy to go. No one wants to stay there, right? This is how disconnected Trump is, and most of Western America is, and most of Western culture is, from being indigenous and being a part of your land. Yes, we know you would leave Trump. You'll go anywhere. You'll go wherever you can get more comfort and more convenience and more exploitation and more profit. We already know that's how you live your life. That's not how indigenous people live their lives and make their decisions. They're not just looking for a better place to live. Gaza is their land. It is their home. It is where they've been for thousands of years. And the U.S. will not get the Palestinians to leave without forcefully ethnically cleansing that land. And the way Trump talks so flippantly about that. And then the next day, his aides try to walk it back. And while he wasn't really meaning that, and then Trump doubled down and said, no, this is what I want to do. This is very concerning about Trump, because he is, whether it's his talk about Gaza, whether it's his talk about Greenland or Panama or even Canada, he is thinking as a colonial expansionist. fueled by a belief in manifest destiny. And I promise you, it is not going to be pretty. It's not going to be just. It's not going to be humane if he tries to enact this agenda. And so we need to pay very close attention to these things. These are the conversations we need to be protesting. These are the things we need to be discussing. We need to be careful not to just fall for the clickbait. We need to look at the deeper things he's trying to do. The ways he's normalizing racism and sexism and white supremacy, the way he's normalizing expansionism and colonialism, the way he's dehumanizing indigenous peoples. These are the things we need to pay very, very, very close attention to. Why? Because these are the types of things that still exist within the foundations of our country. Our Declaration of Independence still refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. Our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution never mentions women. We have constitutionally protected slavery in our criminal justice system. Trump is talking about hardcore foundational American values. Things that when push comes to shove are supported by both the left and the right. It was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who last used the doctrine of discovery as the legal precedent for land titles in 2005. It was Joe Biden in 21 who talked about how the U.S. Army was the army of the Lord, responding to a prophetic call on par with that of Isaiah the prophet. Yes, Trump is talking in a partisan way, but he's appealing to bipartisan colonial values that still exist within the foundations of this country. And this is why these things are so dangerous. Because these are things our country has not stated explicitly. We no longer want to be involved in those sort of thinkings and ideas. They still exist within our foundations. And that is what Trump is appealing to. And these are very, very dangerous conversations that he's beginning to have. And so I want to caution you, my relatives. Don't get dragged into the clickbait. Don't get sucked into the meaningless, insane conversations that the cult of Trump and its chaotic feeding frenzy is trying to create. But please do pay attention to what is being said and what is being enacted on, and recognize how vulnerable our nation is to continuing to going down that route. In 2020, I ran for president of the United States with a goal of removing the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy from our foundations. I ran with a platform of building a nation where for the very first time, we the people actually meant all the people. And our nation, our media, and the two political parties, by and large, said, no, we don't want to have that conversation. We don't want to discuss those things. The Democrats didn't want to talk about them. The Republicans didn't want to talk about them. The media didn't want to mention them. This is something our nation, and I did everything I could to try and bring this into a national debate. And our nation wholeheartedly said, we don't want to talk about those things right now. And now, the majority of US voters voted to put Trump in office for a second term. And yes, people are going crazy right now, but as Trump begins to normalize these values and these goals and these views, he's merely appealing to what is still written in our nation's founding documents and in the history that we tell ourselves exists about this country. And my relatives, that's very dangerous. This is why I reframe my podcast, where one of the goals of my podcast and my work is to create common memory, because where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, the quote says, you must start by creating common memory. Our nation does not have a common memory. We have a white majority that remembers this mythological history of discovery, expansion, opportunity, and exceptionalism. We have communities of color that have the lived history of stolen lands and broken treaties, enslavement and Jim Crow laws, internment camps, mass incarceration, segregation, families being ripped apart at our borders. There's no common memory. And there is no point in US history that we can look back on and say we had healthy community across racial lines. That point does not exist. We have never decided as a nation that we want to be a place where we the people actually means all the people. If you don't believe me, sit down and read our Constitution out loud in a diverse group if possible. That document still advocates for racism, sexism, and white supremacy. And those are the exact same values, constitutional values, that Trump is now appealing to. Now, relatives, we have a lot of work ahead of us for the next 4 years and beyond, because this isn't just Trump. More than half of US voters voted for Trump. We have never addressed our founding documents. This is a national problem, my relatives. So I want to encourage you, don't get sucked into Trump's chaotic world. Take breaks, put down your phone, talk with loved ones, go for walks, eat healthy, get exercise, sleep good at night. Because the road ahead it's a long journey, my relatives. And if you try to live in the chaotic world that Trump lives in, you won't last very long, I fear. It's not a healthy world. It's not a world that is sustainable. This is why, especially in times like this, we have to keep our focus on walking in beauty. Our relatives, thank you for joining me for my second cup of coffee. I hope you find these conversations helpful. Again, I want to put the link to my Patreon if you would like to continue to support my work and help keep my voice independent. I invite you to follow me on Patreon. And I've been very encouraged. I posted about this a few times, but since Trump's inauguration, Unsettling Truth has been selling really well. And I continue to sell copies on my website as well. But when I track it on Facebook, on Amazon, it's selling really well there. And so if you would like to get a signed copy of Unsettling Truth, you can get it from my website. If you would like to start a book study, and you order my book study special from my website and order 10 signed copies from Wireless Hoga on my website, I'll give your book study a free 45-minute virtual Q&A where I'll sit down on a Zoom call with your book study for 45 minutes and answer questions and talk about the book with you. So my relatives, I appreciate all of you. I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine is. And walk in beauty. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Ikahat and Hakonet.